Leon Brooks adjusted his belt and checked his keychain. 20 years at the Cumberland Correctional Institution had made him accustomed to accuracy. The morning shift started at 7 a.m. sharp, and he was never late. At 48, he knew these hallways better than his own home, where his wife Patrice was making breakfast for the kids, and he was already going through the metal detector at the entrance. Security guard Jacob nodded to him from behind the counter. Had a good night last night. The new girl in C block is being quiet. What new girl? Leon picked up the report clipboard, running his eyes over the night shift records. Hendricks, burglary, brought in yesterday. Jacob yawned and stretched. Beautiful, I must say. But you know yourself, everyone here is pretty until a couple months go by. Leon hummed. In 20 years, he'd seen enough newcomers who'd come in hoping for an easy sentence, and then 6 months later turned into bitter recidivists. The women's prison had its own peculiarities. There was less open violence, but intrigue and psychological pressure flourished. C block was on the second floor, and Leon climbed the familiar stairs, listening to his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. The prisoners were still asleep. Rising at 8, breakfast at 9:30. He had time to go around the cells to see if everything was in order. Cell number 23 was the last cell in the corridor. Leon peered through the window and saw a girl sitting on the edge of the bunk. She was dressed in a standard orange robe, but even the prison uniform couldn't hide her unusual beauty. Dark skin, long legs, graceful facial features. Her hair was cut short, a standard requirement for admission. Hendricks. He knocked on the door. It's not rise time yet. The girl lifted her head and looked at him through the bars. Her eyes were surprisingly bright, green with golden speckles. Can't sleep, she said quietly. First night. You'll get used to it. Everyone gets used to it. Leon moved away from the door, but something made him turn around. What's your name? Zara. Her voice was low, a little husky. Leon mentally noted it. Transgender inmates required special attention, not because of tolerance or prejudice, but because they were often targeted by other inmates. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the speakers came on, and the duty officer's voice echoed through the prison. Wake up! Formation in 10 minutes. Leon walked down the corridor, watching as the prisoners rose from their bunks, cleaned themselves up. Some he knew by name. Indira Cole from Cell 16 was serving her 3rd year for fraud, an intelligent woman with a sharp tongue. Teresa Wood from Cell 11 was in her 5th year here, quiet and submissive. Brooks! Shift Supervisor Carla Davis called out to him over the radio. To the supervisor's office, quickly. Selena Wright was sitting behind a massive desk, studying some paperwork. She looked up as Leon entered the office, and he absently noted that she looked tired. Black circles under her eyes, wrinkled suit. Apparently she'd stayed out late last night. Have a seat, Brooks. We have a new inmate, Zara Hendricks, transgender, special monitoring. Selena pulled a photo out of a folder and held it out to him. Minor criminal record, but you know how it is. The first few weeks are the hardest. Leon took the photo. Zara was taken in profile and full face, standard police shots. Even in these formal shots, she looked attractive. Any special instructions? Standard ones. Make sure there are no conflicts with other prisoners. If anything, isolate immediately. Selena rubbed her temples. We had a departmental inspection recently. Everything should be quiet. Leon nodded and stood up. Understood. When he returned to the cell block, the inmates were already lined up for breakfast. Zara stood at the end of the line, keeping a little apart. The other women looked at her curiously, but so far, none had shown any overt aggression. Hendricks, come over here, Leon called out. She stepped away from the formation and approached him. Up close, he noticed that she was quite young. Her personnel file listed her age as 24, but she looked even younger. Listen carefully. We have our own rules here. Stay out of other people's business. Don't cause trouble. Obey the wardens. If you behave well, you'll serve your time. And if I don't? There was a note of challenge in her voice. Then you'll do long and hard time. Leon looked her in the eye. Believe me, it's best not to check. Zara nodded, but he saw something in her gaze that made him wary. Not fear, not submission, more of a studying interest, as if she were evaluating him for himself. Breakfast passed quietly. Leon stood at the entrance to the mess hall, watching the prisoners eat and talk. Zara sat at a separate table, but a few minutes later Indira Cole joined her. The women were talking quietly about something. They've already taken the new girl under their wing, Jacob said. Cole has a knack for picking the right people. What do you mean? Oh, nothing much. It's just that Indira's never friends with fools, so this Zara isn't as easy as she looks. After breakfast, the prisoners went to their workplaces. Zara was assigned to the sewing room, a standard assignment for newcomers. Leon walked her down the hall, explaining the schedule and rules. You work from 9 to 5, lunch break an hour. Fail to meet the norm and you lose privileges. What privileges? Asked Zara. Extra time in the library, phone calls, shopping at the convenience store. Leon stopped at the workshop door. I suggest you don't stand out. They don't like anyone here who disrupts the established order. Zara looked at him carefully. And you? You don't like troublemakers either? The question sounded strange, with some implication that Leon didn't immediately understand. He frowned. I'm here to keep order, and to make sure everyone serves their time safely and goes home. A noble goal. There was no sarcasm in her voice, but Leon sensed she was pondering something. Does everyone return home? Those who behave sensibly do. The workshop was large and noisy. 24 women sat at sewing machines, making uniforms for other correctional facilities. Warden Rita King approached them with a disgruntled look. New girl again? I've got enough people already. She gave Zara an appraising look. Can you sew? A little? You'll learn. Sit with Woods, she'll show you. Rita waved her hand toward the far corner. And remember, this is a place of work, not talk. Leon left Zara in the workshop and went on with his route. The day went smoothly, without incident. He checked the cells, wrote up his report, talked to his colleagues, but several times he caught himself thinking about the new prisoner. There was something unusual about her, not only her appearance, her look, her demeanor, the way she spoke. All this made her stand out among other women. At 5 p.m., the workday ended and the prisoners returned to their cells for an hour before dinner. Leon was walking down the corridor of C Block when he heard muffled voices from cell 23. You shouldn't draw attention to yourself, Indira was saying, especially the wardens. Why not? Replied Zara. I mean, they're here to keep us safe. Naive. They're here to control us, and some of them... Indira paused. Some of them think we owe them something. Leon stopped at the door, but the conversation was interrupted. The women had apparently noticed his shadow in the window. He stood for another minute, then went on his way. His shift ended at 11 p.m. Leon turned in his files to the night warden, changed into civilian clothes, and went to the exit. An old Toyota was waiting for him in the parking lot, a reliable car that had served him well for 8 years. On the way home, he thought about the past day, about Zara Hendricks, who had asked strange questions and looked at him too closely, about Indira's words about the wardens, about having to spend 8 hours again tomorrow in those gray corridors, among people who were broken or pretending to be broken. At home, the usual family chores awaited him. Dinner, helping his son with his homework, talking to his wife about weekend plans. But when Patrice asked how the day had gone, Leon replied with a one-word answer. The same as always. It wasn't until he went to bed that he realized he had lied. The day hadn't been the same. There was something new in him, a curiosity about the prisoner who was different from the others, and that curiosity bothered him. It had been 2 weeks since Zara Hendricks had been admitted, and Leon had noticed that she had adapted to prison life faster than most of the newcomers. She didn't complain, did her ration in the sewing room, kept her cool, and even gained some respect among the other inmates. Indira Cole had clearly taken her under her patronage, which in the local hierarchy meant serious protection. Thursday morning, Leon was making his rounds of the cells before breakfast when he noticed Zara reading a book. This was unusual. Most prisoners preferred to spend their time talking or just lying on their bunks, immersed in their thoughts. "What are you reading?" he asked, stopping at the window. Zara looked up and showed him the cover. "Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. Borrowed it from the library." "What do you think?" "Interesting." She put the book aside and walked to the door. Raskolnikov thought he had the right to decide who was worthy to live and who wasn't. But in the end, he realized he was wrong. Leon frowned. He could hear some subtext in her words, but he couldn't figure out what it was. "Philosophy in prison is a dangerous thing," he said. "It's better to think about simple things here, about doing time and going home. And if there's no one home?" Zara leaned against the bars, and Leon couldn't help but notice the light from the cell window playing on her face. "If there's nowhere to go back to? Then we'll have to create a new home." Wise advice. She smiled, and that smile seemed surprisingly sad to Leon. "Do you follow your own advice?" The strange question made him hesitate. In 20 years on the job, the prisoners had rarely taken an interest in his personal life, and he was used to that order of things. "I don't need advice. I have a home." "Lucky you," Zara said quietly and took up her book again. That same afternoon, Selina Wright summoned Leon to her office. The warden looked even more tired than usual, and on the desk in front of her was a thick folder of paperwork. "Brooks, we're having funding problems," she said without preamble. "The department is cutting the budget by 20%. That means layoffs." Leon felt something clench in his chest. 20 years of work, a mortgage, kids who needed to pay for college. It could all come crashing down overnight. Who will be affected? I don't know yet. They'll look by seniority, by characteristics, by infractions. Selina leaned back in her chair. "Your seniority is good. Your character references are good too. But if there are any problems..." She didn't finish, but the point was clear. Any infraction, any complaint, any incident could be grounds for dismissal. Leon nodded and stood up. "Understood. Everything will be quiet." "I hope so." Selina took up the paperwork again. "By the way, how's the new girl, Hendricks? No problems?" "None. She's behaving in an exemplary manner." "Good. The last thing we need right now is a scandal involving transgender inmates. You know how activists like to make a fuss." Leon left the office with a heavy feeling. The threat of dismissal hung over him like the sword of Damocles, and he knew he had to be extremely careful. Not a single mistake. Not a single occasion for criticism. In the evening, when the prisoners were eating dinner, he noticed that Zara was sitting alone at the table. Indira was at the infirmary, complaining of a headache. Several women from neighboring tables were looking at Zara, and there was something unkind in their gazes. "Hendricks!" Leon called out. "Come here!" Zara stood up and walked over to him. Up close, he noticed that her hands were trembling slightly, a sign of nervous tension. "Is something wrong?" "No, everything's fine." She spoke softly, almost a whisper. "It's just that some people think I'm in the wrong place." Leon looked around the dining room. Conversations had died down, and many of the prisoners were looking in their direction. The atmosphere was tense. "Come, I'll escort you to your cell." They left the mess hall and walked down the corridor. Zara walked beside her, and Leon could smell the odor of cheap soap coming from her, and something else faintly perceptible. Some feminine scent that the prison galleys could not drown out. "Thank you," she said when they reached the cell, "for sticking up for me." "I wasn't sticking up for you. I'm just doing my job." Zara turned to face him, and her eyes seemed almost black in the dim light of the hallway. "And if you weren't doing your job, would you have interceded then?" Leon didn't know what to answer. The question was too personal, too direct. He felt something change in the air between them, become denser, more meaningful. "I don't know," he said honestly. Zara nodded, as if that answer satisfied her completely. "Honesty is a rare quality," she said, "especially around here." The next day, Leon noticed that he thought of Zara more often than he should. When he passed the sewing room, he involuntarily searched for her with his eyes among the women working. When he went around the cells, he lingered longer with the 23rd than with the others. It bothered him, but he couldn't stop. After lunch, there was an incident. Teresa Wood of Cell 11 reported that her cigarettes, a valuable currency in the prison economy, had been stolen. Suspicion fell on the newcomers, including Zara. Leon was forced to conduct a search. Zara had to strip naked while he checked her clothes and personal belongings. Professional necessity demanded a cold detachment, but Leon caught himself looking at her as more than just a warden looking at a prisoner. Her body was beautiful, well-proportioned, feminine. The surgery had been done well, and only an experienced eye could spot the surgical marks. "I don't have any cigarettes," Zara said calmly, standing naked in the middle of the cell. "I know," Leon replied, trying not to look at her. "Get dressed." As she pulled on her robe, their eyes met. There was no embarrassment or anger in her gaze, just a studying attention, as if she was trying to understand something. "You're not like the other wardens," she said. "In what way?" "You see me as a person, not just a number in the system." Leon felt something clench in his chest. Zara's words hit exactly on target. He did see her as a person. More than that, he saw her as a woman, and that was dangerous. "I see a prisoner doing time," he said, trying to speak in an official tone. Zara smiled, and there was something knowing, understanding in that smile. "Of course, I apologize for the inaccuracy." That same evening, Indira Cole returned from the infirmary and had a long conversation with Zara in their shared cell. Leon couldn't hear the words, but the tone of the conversation was serious, almost anxious. Later, when the prisoners were asleep, he walked down the corridor with a flashlight, checking the cells. A nightlight was burning in the 23rd, and he saw that Zara was awake. She was lying on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. Leon knocked softly on the door. Zara turned her head and stood up, walking over to the bars. "Can't sleep?" "Thinking," she answered in a whisper. "About a lot of things." "About what, exactly?" Zara was quiet for a moment, as if pondering whether to speak. About how people see what they want to see, and about how the truth is sometimes more dangerous than a lie. Leon felt the conversation taking a strange turn again. Behind the bars stood a beautiful woman in an orange robe, speaking in riddles, and he didn't understand what was happening to himself. "Zara," he said, calling her by name for the first time. "Yes? Be careful. It's easy to make mistakes here." "And you? Can you make mistakes too?" The question hung in the air between them. Leon realized that the correct answer was no, that he was a professional who didn't make mistakes, but something compelled him to tell the truth. "I can, especially when it comes to people." Zara nodded as if she'd expected exactly that answer. "Then we're alike," she said. "I make mistakes when it comes to people too." Leon stood in the dark hallway, flashlight in hand, and felt the wall of professional detachment he'd been building for 20 years crumble. The woman behind the bars looked at him with understanding, and he suddenly realized he didn't want to leave. "Good night, Zara," he said, and forced himself to go further down the hall. Behind him, he heard a quiet reply, "Good night, Leon." At home, his wife asked why he was so pensive. Leon replied that he was tired, and it was true. But the tiredness wasn't physical. He was tired of rules, of routine, of having to be always right. And for the first time in years, he thought about what it would be like to break the rules. Thomas Gray, the warden on duty, discovered the body at 6 o'clock on the morning of the 27th, He was doing his usual rounds before lifting the prisoners when he noticed a motionless figure in cell 23. Zara Hendricks was lying face down on the floor, a stool overturned beside her bunk. A rope, spun from sheets, was fastened to the grate of the ceiling vent at one end, the other around the dead woman's neck. Thomas immediately raised the alarm, and 10 minutes later, a prison nurse, Rose Turner, was working in the cell. She pronounced the death and recorded the time, about 4 a.m. According to prison rules, the scene was to remain untouched until investigators arrived. Leon Brooks learned what had happened on his way to work. He received a call from the shift supervisor informing him that the morning shift had been canceled. He turned his car around and drove home, but he couldn't stay home. The news of Zara's death hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't believe that the woman he had spoken to yesterday was no longer breathing. At 9:30, he arrived at the prison after all. The parking lot was packed with police, ambulances, and Department of Corrections cars. Journalists, who had somehow already learned about the incident, were crowded at the entrance. Selena Wright stood in the lobby being interviewed by a department spokesperson. Her face was stony, her voice flat and official. She explained that the inmate suffered from depression and was unable to adapt to prison life. The standard press version. "Brooks!" Shift supervisor Carla Davis called out to him. "What are you doing here? The shift has been canceled." "I knew Hendricks better than anyone. If you need a statement." Carla nodded. "The detective is already here. Might want to talk to you." Detective Irvin Murphy arrived at 8:30 and went straight to examine the scene. He was 52 years old, had been on the force for over 20 years, and had seen enough suicides to tell the real ones from the staged ones. Tall, thin, with a streak of gray in his close-cropped hair, he moved slowly and methodically, taking note of every detail. Cell 23 was small, 3 meters by 4, 2 bunks, a small table, a wash basin in the corner. Zara lay 1/2 meter away from the overturned stool, the rope tight around her neck. At first glance, it looked like a classic suicide by hanging. But Murphy was alarmed by the details. The stool had fallen too far from the body. If Zara had jumped off it, it should have been closer. The knot on the rope had been tied on the right side, even though Hendricks was left-handed. There were faint marks on his wrists, as if his hands had been tied and then untied. "Who found the body?" he asked the warden on duty. "I did, sir. Thomas Gray. Routine 6 a.m. rounds." The warden was young, about 25 years old, and clearly nervous. Noticed she wasn't moving, looked into the cell and saw this. "Did you enter the cell?" "No, sir." Called the nurse right away. She checked her pulse and said the woman was dead. Murphy nodded and continued his examination. Zara's cellmate, Indira Cole, had been moved to another cell immediately after the body was discovered. The detective planned to question her first. Indira sat in the visiting room with her hands folded on the desk, a 31-year-old woman with an intelligent face and a wary gaze. She answered questions calmly, but Murphy sensed she was hiding something. "When was the last time you saw Hendricks alive?" "Last night, 10 o'clock. Lights out time. We talked for a while, then went to bed." "Talked about what?" Indira was quiet for a moment. "About books. She liked to read." "Nothing else about anything?" "No." "Did Hendricks seem depressed? Did she say anything about suicide?" "Never." Indira shook her head. Zara wasn't the type to give up. She had plans for the future. "What kind of plans?" "Wanted to get an education after she was released. Talked about college, a new life." Indira looked directly at the detective. "She wouldn't kill herself. Ever." Murphy jotted down answers in his notebook. Cole's words confirmed his suspicions. It wasn't suicide. "Tell me about the wardens. How did they feel about Hendricks?" Indira was silent again, pondering an answer. "In a variety of ways. Most were normal, like all prisoners, but..." "But?" "Brooks treated her special, lingered outside our cell, talked to her more than the others." "Special how?" "I don't know exactly. just in a different way. The way a man treats a woman he likes. Murphy looked up from his notepad. This was important information. Did you see anything specific? Inappropriate behavior? No, nothing explicit, just a feeling. Zara noticed it too. Did she say anything about it? Indira hesitated. Said he wasn't like the others, that there was something human about him. After talking to Cole, the detective went to find Leon Brooks. The warden was waiting in the warden's office, nervously fumbling with the keys on his belt. When Murphy entered, Leon stood up and extended his hand for a handshake. "Detective Murphy?" "Leon Brooks, warden. Heard you wanted to talk to me." Murphy shook the outstretched hand and noted that Brooks's palm was damp with sweat. "Have a seat. A few questions about Zara Hendricks." "Of course. Terrible tragedy. I can't believe she would do something like that." "And you're sure she did?" Murphy stared intently at his interlocutor. Leon hesitated. "What do you mean? Isn't it suicide?" "We're considering all the theories so far. Tell me about your relationship with Hendricks." "No special relationship. I'm a warden, she's an inmate. Standard service contacts." "Witnesses say you paid extra attention to her." Leon blushed. "She was new, required special supervision. Transgender inmates are often victims of aggression." "And how often did you talk to her?" "I don't remember exactly. On official business." Murphy made notes in his notebook without taking his eyes off Brooks. The warden was clearly nervous, avoiding a direct look. "Did you work last night?" "Yeah, day shift, till 11. "Was Hendricks on her usual behavior?" Leon nodded a little too quickly. "Yes, everything was normal. No signs of depression or suicidal thoughts." "So her suicide came as a surprise to you?" "A complete surprise. She seemed like a strong woman, not the type to give up." The detective closed his notebook and stood up. "That's all for now. Additional questions may be needed." Leon stood up as well, and Murphy noticed his hands shaking. The next step was to examine the surveillance cameras. The prison's video surveillance system was old and didn't cover all areas, but the C-block corridor had a good view. Murphy reviewed the footage from 6 p.m. to 6 in the morning. At 12:30 at night, Night Warden Jason Lowe walked down the corridor, a routine round. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he passed through again. Between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, the corridor was empty, and it was during this period that the medical examiner believed death had occurred. But at 3:20, someone passed through the corridor again. A figure in a warden's uniform, face hidden in shadow. The man stopped in front of cell 23, stood for a few minutes, and then quickly left. The quality of the recording made it impossible to make an exact identification, but the height and build resembled Leon Brooks. Murphy transcribed the time from the recording into his notebook. If it was Brooks, why was he coming to Hendricks' cell at 3 in the morning? He was scheduled to finish his shift at 11 p.m. Nurse Rose Turner confirmed the preliminary time of death as between 2 and 4 in the morning. There were no signs of struggle on the body, but she noted strange marks on the wrists. "It looks like rope marks or plastic tie marks," she said, "but faint, as if the hands had been bound for a short time." Could this have happened post-mortem? Theoretically, yes. But why tie the hands of a dead person? Murphy didn't answer that question, but he was already forming a version of what had happened. By evening, he had gathered enough information to realize Zara Hendricks' death was not a suicide. Someone had strangled her and then staged the hanging. The prime suspect was Leon Brooks, who may have had a personal relationship with the victim. Selena Wright listened to the detective's preliminary findings with a stone face. "Do you realize you're accusing my employee of murder?" "I'm not accusing anyone yet, just gathering the facts. Brooks has worked for us for 20 years, impeccable reputation, no wrongdoing. However, he may have had an inappropriate relationship with an inmate, and that relationship could have led to tragedy." Selena sighed heavily. The prison murder scandal was the last thing she needed right now. "What do you need to continue the investigation?" Tomorrow I'll question anyone who may have seen or heard anything. I'll go through Hendricks' personal effects, check phone calls and correspondence. Standard procedure. Good, but please be delicate. The reputation of the institution has already suffered. Murphy nodded and gathered his papers. He understood the warden's position, but his job was not to protect his reputation, but to find the truth. Late that night, the detective sat in his office and studied the case file. Photos from the scene, witness statements, surveillance footage, everything pointed to the fact that Zara Hendricks had been murdered. What remained was to figure out a motive and find enough evidence to arrest a suspect. The next morning, Detective Murphy began by reviewing Zara Hendricks' medical records. The prison infirmary physician, Dr. Samuel King, had given him full information about the deceased's medical condition. What he learned dramatically changed the direction of the investigation. Hendricks was HIV positive, Dr. King said, leafing through the chart. Diagnosed 3 years ago, but she had been receiving antiretroviral therapy and was doing well. Viral load was under control. Murphy looked up from his notepad. Who knew about this diagnosis? Me, Nurse Turner, and, naturally, the patient herself. Under the rules of confidentiality, we're not authorized to divulge that information. And the other inmates? Administration? Not unless she told someone herself. Dr. King took off his glasses and wiped them clean. Although, there were certain complications. What kind of complications? Hendricks missed taking her medication twice. Said she'd forgotten, but I suspected she was deliberately not taking the therapy. Why would she do that? I don't know. Probably didn't want the other inmates to see her swallowing pills. HIV still causes prejudice, especially in gated communities. Murphy took note of this information. The victim's HIV status could explain a lot, especially if someone in the community learned of the disease and reacted inappropriately. The next item was to examine Zara's personal belongings. In her nightstand, the detective found several books, letters from her lawyer, photographs, and a small notebook with notes. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and the entries were in English with occasional touches of other languages. Most of the entries dealt with daily prison life, but a few pages caught Murphy's particular attention. Zara wrote about the warden without mentioning him by name, but it was clear from the description that she was referring to Leon Brooks. He looks at me differently, not as a prisoner, but as a woman. It's dangerous, but at the same time, pleasurable. It's been so long since anyone has looked at me just as a person. Next came the notes on how their relationship had progressed. Zara recorded every conversation, every look, every show of attention from the warden. Today, he lingered outside the cell longer than usual. We talked about books, about life outside these walls. He told me that he was tired of the routine, that he sometimes thinks about changing things. I can see the loneliness in his eyes. The last entries were dated a week earlier. Things are getting too serious. Leon, I know his name now, clearly has feelings for me. Yesterday, he almost took my hand, stopped at the last moment, but the intent was obvious. What happens when he finds out the truth about me? Murphy reread this entry several times. The truth about me was a clear indication of HIV status. Zara realized she was withholding important information from the man she had feelings for. The next step was to re-interview Leon Brooks. This time, the detective was armed with concrete facts and ready for a tougher conversation. Leon showed up at the appointed time, but he looked worse than the day before. There were dark circles under his eyes, his hands were trembling slightly, and there was nervousness in his movements. Mr. Brooks, you said yesterday that your relationship with Hendricks was strictly official. I want to give you an opportunity to reconsider that statement. Leon straightened in his chair. I don't know what you mean by that. Murphy pulled photocopies of pages from Zara's notebook from a folder and laid them on the table. She kept a diary, described your relationship in quite a bit of detail. Leon glanced at the papers, and Murphy saw his face change. The color had gone from his cheeks. His Adam's apple twitched at the swallow. I can explain. I'm listening. Leon was silent for almost a minute, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice sounded tired and doomed. Yes, there was. More than a service relationship between us. But I never crossed the line. Never. What line? Physical intimacy. We only talked. Maybe more often than we should have, but just talking. Murphy leaned back in his chair. Tell me how it all started. From day one. She was special, smart, beautiful. Not like the other inmates. I became interested in talking to her. And then? Then I realized I was falling in love. Realized and scared. 20 years of distinguished service, a family, a reputation. It could all come crashing down because of one woman. But you kept in touch. Yes, I couldn't stop. She, too, had feelings for me, too. It was mutual. Murphy took notes without taking his eyes off Brooks. When was the last time you spoke to Hendricks? The night before last. I was making my nightly rounds and stopped by her cell. She writes in her diary about hiding some truth from you. Do you know what it's about? Leon shook his head. I have no idea. What if I told you that Zara Hendricks was HIV positive? The effect was instantaneous. Leon turned white as a sheet, his lips quivered, and he gripped the armrests of his chair. What? What did you say? She had HIV, diagnosed 3 years ago. She was receiving treatment but hid her status from others. Leon sat motionless, digesting what he'd heard. Murphy watched his reaction, and what he saw confirmed his suspicions. When did you find out about this? The detective asked quietly. Yeah, I didn't. Don't lie to me, Brooks. You found out about Hendricks's HIV status, and it caused a conflict between you. Leon covered their faces with his hands. There was silence in the room for several minutes, interrupted only by the ticking of the wall clock. 2 weeks ago, he said finally. I happened to see her taking her medication. Recognize the pills, my brother takes the same ones. And what happened? I asked her straight out. She didn't deny it. Leon looked up, and Murphy saw tears in his eyes. Said she was going to tell me, but was afraid of my reaction. What was your reaction? Shock at first, then anger. At her, at myself, at the whole situation. I realized I could have been infected. Have you been tested? Leon nodded. Got the results yesterday. Positive. Murphy set aside his pen and looked intently at his interlocutor. The motive for the murder was becoming more and more obvious. What happened the night Hendricks died? I didn't kill her. Leon spoke quickly, desperately. Yes, I was angry. Yes, blamed her for ruining my life. But I didn't kill her. The security footage shows you coming to her cell at 3 a.m. Explain. Leon sighed heavily. I wanted to talk to her one last time, to tell her it was over between us. And what happened? Nothing. I stood there for a while, but I never decided to wake her up. I went home. Did you go into the cell? No, just stood in the hallway. Murphy didn't believe a word of it. Too many coincidences, too obvious a motive. A man discovers his mistress has infected him with a deadly disease, goes to her house at night, and in the morning, she is found dead. Mr. Brooks, you have the right to an attorney. I suggest you exercise that right. Leon realized what those words meant. He stood up, staggered, and headed for the exit. Detective, he said, turning around at the door. I loved her. Despite everything, I loved Zara. I would never hurt her. After Brooks left, Murphy called the prosecutor and laid out the available facts. There was enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant, but the prosecutor asked for another 24 hours to further review the evidence. The detective spent the rest of the day reviewing medical records and reconstructing the chronology of events. The picture that emerged was as follows. Leon Brooks had an intimate relationship with a female inmate, contracted HIV from her, found out about it, and in a fit of rage killed the woman, staging a suicide. The only thing that did not give Murphy a rest was Indira Cole's words that Zara was not suicidal. The woman was making plans for the future, dreaming of an education, a new life after prison. Why would she voluntarily leave her life? There could only be one answer. She didn't leave voluntarily. By late afternoon, the detective had a complete picture of the crime. Leon Brooks, having learned of her infection, had come to the prison late at night using his office keys. Forced Zara out of her bunk, probably tied her hands, then strangled her, then hung the body, making it look like a suicide. The technical details had yet to be verified, but the general pattern of the crime was clear. Tomorrow morning, Murphy planned to arrest Leon Brooks for the murder of Zara Hendricks. The case was nearing completion, but the detective felt no satisfaction. Too many lives had been ruined because of one fatal connection. A young woman had died. A middle-aged man had ruined his career and family by contracting an incurable disease. The story had no winners, only victims of circumstance and their own decisions. The arrest occurred at 7 the next morning. Detective Murphy arrived at Leon Brooks' home accompanied by 2 patrol cars. The small 2-story house in a working-class Cumberland neighborhood looked ordinary and peaceful. A manicured lawn, children's bicycles on the porch, a mailbox with the family's name on it. The door was opened by Leon's wife, Patrice, a woman of about 45 with a tired face and a wary look. She was dressed in a robe, her hair disheveled. Obviously, the police had woken her up. "Mrs. Brooks, we need to speak to your husband," Murphy said, showing his ID. "Leon's still asleep. What's wrong?" "We have an arrest warrant. Please get him." Patrice turned pale, but didn't ask any unnecessary questions. She called for her husband, and a few minutes later, Leon appeared on the stairs. He was dressed in house clothes, but looked as if he had been up all night. "Leon Brooks, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Zara Hendricks," the detective said in an official tone. "You have the right to remain silent." The patrolman handcuffed Leon, and Murphy read him his rights. His wife stood in the doorway, holding onto the jamb, children peering out from behind her. A son about 16, a daughter about 14, both wide-eyed with terror. "Daddy, what's going on?" the daughter asked in a thin voice. Leon turned to the family. His gaze read pain, shame, and hopelessness. "It's going to be okay," he said, but no one believed those words. In the police car on the way to the station, Leon was silent, looking out the window at the familiar places passing by. Murphy sat beside him, studying the case file. There was enough evidence to charge him, but the detective hoped to get a confession. It would make the trial easier. At the station, Leon was placed in a holding cell, and an hour later his lawyer, Ronald Stevens, an older man with years of criminal defense practice, came to see him. They talked privately for about 20 minutes, after which the lawyer turned to the detective. "My client is willing to testify," Stevens said, "but I insist that mitigating circumstances be taken into account." The interrogation took place in the presence of the attorney and the prosecutor. Leon sat at the table with his hands folded and spoke quietly but clearly. Murphy turned on his tape recorder and prepared to take notes. "Tell me what happened the night Zara Hendricks died," the detective asked. Leon took a deep breath. "I didn't plan to kill her, I just wanted to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that she ruined my life. About the fact that I contracted HIV because of her. About how my family is in danger now, too." "How did you get into the prison at night?" "I still had the keys to the service entrance. I've known the night shift guard for 20 years. He didn't check my ID." "What happened in the cell?" Leon was quiet for a moment, gathering his composure. "I woke Zara up, told her we needed to talk. She agreed." "What did you talk about?" "I accused her of lying. Said she had infected me on purpose, that she was hiding her diagnosis. Zara tried to explain that she was afraid of my reaction, that she was going to tell the truth. And then, I wasn't in control of myself. yelling at her, calling her horrible words. She cried, begged for forgiveness. Leon's voice shook. Then I grabbed her by the throat. "You strangled her?" "Yes. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. I was in a rage. All I could see was a red veil in front of my eyes." The prosecutor was making notes in her notebook. The lawyer sat next to his client, occasionally placing a hand on his shoulder. "What happened after she died?" I realized what I'd done. Got scared. Thought about my family, my children, that their lives would be ruined too. Leon raised his eyes to the detective. "Decided to stage a suicide." "How exactly?" "Tied the sheets into a rope, tied it to the air vent, hanged the body, put a stool next to it, and knocked it over." "Why tie her hands?" "So there wouldn't be any signs of struggle on her neck. Figured if her hands were tied, my finger marks wouldn't be noticed." Murphy nodded. Leon's version of events matched the forensic evidence. "Do you regret what you did?" Leon covered his faces with his hands. "Every second of it. Zara was a good person. Yes, she was wrong to withhold the diagnosis, but she didn't deserve to die." "Why did you decide to come clean?" "Couldn't live with the burden any longer, and I didn't want my family to be plagued by suspicion." The interrogation lasted another hour. Leon gave all the details of the crime without trying to hide or embellish anything. His testimony was logical and consistent, not contradicting the collected evidence. After the questioning, the prosecutor turned to the defense attorney. "Is your client ready to enter into a plea agreement?" Stevens nodded. "Provided that mitigating circumstances are taken into account. My client had no intent to kill, acted under the influence. We'll consider that offer." Leon was placed back in his cell, where he spent the next few hours awaiting the prosecutor's decision. His attorney visited him several times, discussing the details of the upcoming trial. News of the arrest quickly spread throughout Cumberland County. Local media covered the case with details that shocked the town's residents. The story of a prison guard who killed an inmate after she contracted HIV became a sensation. There was a tense atmosphere in the correctional facility. Selena Wright held emergency meetings with staff in an attempt to minimize damage to the prison's reputation. The Department of Corrections sent a commission to review the security system. Indira Cole was moved to another unit. She had been threatened by some inmates who thought she had told the police too much. The woman held firm, but it was clear that the death of her cellmate had shaken her badly. "Zara was a good person," she told the detective during their last conversation. "Didn't deserve to die like that." Leon's family was in dire straits. Patrice had to take a leave of absence from work to deal with the problems that piled up. Children were bullied at school, neighbors avoided socializing. The woman filed for divorce and began the procedure of changing her last name. "I can't forgive him for what he did not only to that woman, but to us," she told reporters. "My children should not have to pay for their father's crimes." A week later, prosecutors decided to enter into a plea agreement with the defendant. Leon Brooks pleaded guilty to murder with mitigating circumstances and received a sentence of 15 years in prison without parole for 10 years. The court hearing was quick and uneventful. Leon looked aged and gaunt, but he held his dignity. When the judge read the sentence, he stood straight without averting his eyes. The defendant, Leon Brooks, is found guilty of the murder of Zara Hendricks and is sentenced to 15 years in prison. After the verdict was announced, Leon was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at the spectators in the audience, none of whom were members of his family. Detective Murphy closed the case and filed it away. He had done his job professionally, but he felt no satisfaction. Too many lives had been broken because of one crime. Zara Hendricks was buried in the city cemetery. Several LGBT activists and the lawyer who represented her during the trial came to the funeral. None of the relatives were present. The family refused to take the body away. Indira Cole was granted parole for cooperating with the investigation and helping to solve the crime. She left Cumberland and moved to another state where she started a new life. Selena Wright resigned a month after the case was completed. The Department of Corrections conducted an extensive audit and found many security violations. Several employees were fired, and new rules were put in place to monitor staff. Leon Brooks was serving time in a maximum security prison 200 kilometers from Cumberland. He worked in the library, behaved roughly, did not cause problems for the administration. He did not receive letters from his family. His wife forbade the children any contact with their father. The story received a wide resonance in the media and became the subject of discussion of the problems of the penitentiary system. Activists demanded reforms, stricter control over correctional staff, and better protection for prisoners. But for those involved in the tragedy, public attention was cold comfort. Zara Hendricks was dead. Leon Brooks would spend the best years of his life in prison. His family was devastated. No one won in this story. Everyone was a victim of circumstance, bad decisions, and human frailties. Detective Murphy kept working, investigating new cases, but sometimes he wondered if the tragedy could have been prevented. If Zara had been honest about her diagnosis, if Leon had shown more self-control, if the prison had a better surveillance system. Could things have turned out differently? There were no answers to those questions, and the detective preferred not to ponder what couldn't be changed.